Hey everybody, and welcome to the Holotapes Weekly Podcast. This is episode number 15, number 15. And thank you all for joining me today. I'm Jordan M., your host, and today I'm joined by my co-host Jordan.
Hello.
My other co-host Monty.
What's up?
And our wonderful guest today, Mr. John.
How you doing?
Hey John, how are you?
I am peachy.
How is everybody else doing?
For me. I'm fucking peachy.
Bland.
Fucking peachy shirts never coming soon. As always, I'm going to talk to you today about your weekly dollar, and today's weekly dollar is going to be hunger. I think we've done it before, but we're going to do it again just because it has to do with today's topic, and we'll talk about that a little bit later after we answer some questions. But, go donate to UNICEF or some of those other kind of charities that help to bring food to people in need all across the world. I mean, we talk about Africa having food problems and food shortages, but they're all throughout Eastern Europe and parts of the U.S. and South America, and it's everywhere. So let's go ahead and deal with that. So go out, give $1, let us know how much you gave and what organization on Twitter at Holotapes Weekly, and we'll make sure to give you a shout out. Other than that, let's go ahead and get started. Is everybody ready?
Hell yeah.
Woohoo.
Yeah.
Wow.
All right. Question number 1 from Don Pummel at Holy Hotcakes on Twitter. He asks, do you ever find your own personal moral values affect the way you play?
Yeah.
All the time.
I think that it does every single time for me as well, unless I'm trying to do really, really hardcore roleplay. Like one of my...
I just can't be a bitch is the...
You can't be a bitch?
Which is surprising because it doesn't stop me in real life. Anyway.
I feel like I said, if I'm not going through like being really, really specific about the role playing I'm doing, like if I'm specifically going for like a Caesar's Legion playthrough or an Enclave playthrough or something like that, I'm always kind of the good guy, and I always fall into the good guy roles. I always find that you get better rewards for doing the good thing in most of the games as well, or at least I feel like you do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the first playthrough for me, I'm always, making the good moral decisions and such. But it's funny you mentioned that, 'cause I was just playing Honest Hearts the other night, and that whole DLC gives you like a big moral decision whether to kill the white legs or just let them be. Yeah. And I mean, when I was choosing that, I was really surprised how it was pulling at my moral strings there, but ultimately I just went with the most fun thing to do, which is to kill them. So
Yeah. Absolutely.
The first time I played through New Vegas, I did a NCR run my very first time because that's kind of what the game pushes you to do. But I beat the game, and then when I started playing it again, I was trying to do a Caesar's Legion run, and I got about halfway through and was just like, no, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah. It's definitely hard. I think the only time that I've ever been able to successfully go through on New Vegas and play through as an evil character was when I do my Mars playthrough. I go and pretend that I'm Mars, the god of war, and so I have to go and get like Centurion armor, and I have to do everything that Caesar says and like prove that I'm a strong warrior by killing anyone who stands in my way or even like gets snippy at me. And I think that when I'm in that character's mind is the only time I can really force myself to make those decisions. And we talked about it before about how Bethesda is very, very good. Bethesda and Obsidian and just the Fallout series in general is very, very good at making you feel for these characters. In a lot of other games, it's kind of like, in GTA 5, you can go around blasting people left and right because they don't really have a soul. They don't have that kind of pull. But in Fallout, even just like the one-off characters, they seem to have kind of like this air about them that makes them feel alive.
yeah.
Right.
Except the one thing that doesn't affect me is stealing. Like, I'll just go around and steal fucking everything. That doesn't affect me.
Yeah.
It's a victimless crime. It's okay.
Yeah.
I
As
don't
long
think
as
it's
nobody does.
I don't think it's a victimless crime, especially in the wasteland. You steal somebody's sugar bombs and they die the next day from starvation.
Well, if all they have to eat is sugar bombs, then they're probably gonna die anyway.
Probably.
Yeah, like diabetes maybe, but...
Go and make some Ultra Jet out of it. All right, moving on to the next question. Tommy Hill, at TommyHill46 on Twitter, asked us, hey, Holotapes Weekly, what characters in prior Fallouts would you love to see a cameo from? I don't think that you can have a good cameo from any of the other Fallouts. They're too far back in the past. I think you can have their descendants, like Cass.
Well, I mean, if he's talking about, like, who we'd want to see in, like, Fallout 4, I mean, depending where it is, we could see a few characters.
Oh, from Fallout 3 and 4, yeah, but if you're talking about if you want somebody from 1 and 2 to move forward
Oh.
into 4, there's no way.
Well, I mean, we saw Harold from Fallout 1 come into Fallout 3, so I mean,
Okay,
anything's
so
possible,
Yeah.
I
maybe
guess.
ghouls, maybe ghouls.
Well,
Yeah.
you have Marcus as well.
Oh, that's true. That's very true.
Yep.
I always forget about Marcus. He's up there in Jacobstown.
But human character wise, it from 1 or 2, unless Fallout 4 is placed between 2 and 3 timeline wise, then
Yeah.
That would
Which
be
is
such a weird transition, though, from 3 to 4, it going backwards.
But it
Yeah,
might.
it would be.
But we talked about it before that it might be the perfect way for Bethesda to sort of retcon some of the things that they've done in 3 and sort of clean up the lore a little bit. But I still don't think they're going to do it. But it's entirely possible.
I mean, it wouldn't be impossible for someone from Fallout 2 to, appear in like the next game because I think Fallout 2 took place in like 2240 something, I think.
Hmm.
So I mean, it wouldn't be impossible, I guess. But
They'd be old though.
they'd be old, yeah.
Or
They'd be old, and like, what's the survival rate in the wasteland? Like, I mean,
it's
Yeah,
pretty,
people don't live as long, I'm pretty sure.
it's pretty low. But if we're talking about specifically about Fallout 3 in New Vegas, I think that if we're gonna stay on the East Coast, it'd be interesting to see like hopefully Dr. Lee again and Lucas Sims would be interesting to see.
Yeah. I mean, if the game's in Boston, you can pretty much bet that we'll see a couple characters.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
it's going to want to continue, some of the lore that they've set up.
Yeah,
but at the same time, I don't want it to be such a continuation that it's like
the same story.
the same game, just in Boston.
Yeah, I don't think anybody wants that.
Yeah.
And I think that if you're going to do that, you're not going to use updated graphics or anything like that. You would probably keep it in the same
Right.
sphere, so to speak. So, but moving on. Next question. Cinemod DMazone1 on Twitter asks, what do you guys think happened to all the boats sailing overseas during the Great War?
They sunk.
It depends on the boat.
How so?
Well, I don't know.
Well, I mean, some of them could have turned into, like, Revit City-esque settlements if they were near the coast.
Absolutely, and I think that I think we've talked about this. I don't know if we talked about it actually in a recording, but we've talked about how if you had something like a large cruise ship that possibly had the ability to grow food on it, you may be able to have just a floating city that never comes to land.
Right.
You would-
It wouldn't be able to go anywhere, that's for sure. Unless it's like a giant ass sailboat. You're pretty
A
much stuck.
giant-ass sailboat.
I mean, you never know. It could be like some pilgrim bullshit. I don't know, Monty.
Yeah. Because I'm sure sailboats will survive the nuclear holocaust.
Yeah,
Well,
and
if they're in the ocean,
but the lore does also talk about the seas were churning and the land was destroyed and flooding was happening. So
Yeah, you gotta remember, there's probably, like, massive tsunami waves and,
Right.
there's all
And-
sorts of shit happening. So.
yeah, hurricanes in the middle of the ocean. It really, a whole bunch of different things
I mean, if you ever saw the movie The Day After Tomorrow, it was probably something like that.
that.
The plot of Fallout 4 is just going to be 2012 with all the arcs and shit that they
Oh my
built.
gosh.
That's all it's going to be.
Yes, let's keep talking about shitty movies that are so unrealistic.
2012, the most scientifically inaccurate movie of all time. The neutrinos, they're mutating.
You just see a giant wave just come and, like, lift up Rivet City and just smash it against the Washington Monument.
But yeah, I think that it really depends on the ship and what they had on board. But as always, I think that we've seen that lore writing for Fallout has always been very, very good, and it doesn't take itself too seriously, while at the same time touching on a lot of serious subjects. So I think that they could reach out for more of that comical kind of, we all live on a ship and it was a casino ship and everything's gambling and we're all still snooty rich people, even though all of us have had nothing for 200 years. It would be really interesting to see.
I agree.
All right.
Yeah.
Next question. Polite Chap at some Polite Chap on Twitter asks, greetings from the UK. Have you guys seen the Fallout Nuka Break series? And if so, what did you think?
Yeah,
I
that's
have
funny.
seen Nuka Break.
Nuka Break is awesome.
Yeah, I just got done watching it. It's incredibly well done, and it's really funny.
It is. And I think that they do a really good job of keeping to a very Fallout-esque story.
And like, holy shit, their costuming.
Yeah. Well, I just read in the credits that they talked to Chris Avallone about making the story make sense in the Fallout lore, so that's pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that if we ever see a Fallout movie, hopefully we'll be able to see these guys. Jonathan, have you seen these at all?
I've seen the first 2 episodes, I think, and it's great. It's so well done, and it keeps really well to the comedic aspect of Fallout.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
absolutely.
really nailed the feel of Fallout.
Yeah, they did. The only thing that I had to complain about with that was the ghoul costume bothered me a little bit because I always think of ghouls as having peeling skin, and his skin was more gaunt than peeling.
Yeah, but I'll give
Yeah.
him a break. Like, if
I mean,
you're...
I am gonna give him
They
I
didn't
am
have
gonna
a
give him a break because I'm nitpicking at this point.
Yeah.
So
Come on, Jordan. Come some slack.
I'm just saying, man. I'm just saying. But yeah, it's great. If you guys haven't seen it, go look it up. The Fallout Nuka Break series, I'll actually put it in the description below. So go ahead and click, and I'll put a link to the first episode. And shout out to those guys. And we love your work. And maybe you guys can come on, and we'll give you a little interview. How about that?
That'd be awesome.
Hit us up.
That'd be really cool.
Awesome.
Let's make it happen.
And on to our last question, we got into a conversation with somebody on Twitter. Somebody get me a name about...
Rusty?
Was it Rusty?
Rusty Randolph? Is that where
Rusty
you're going?
Randolph on Twitter, yes. We got into a conversation about why does no one make games like Bethesda? And we talked about this a little bit last episode, but I think that we want to go into a little bit more detail with about this. And, so I asked him on Twitter. By the way, his handle on Twitter is @RustyOldTunes if you want to hit him up. But we were talking, and he says he wants that open world feel instead of playing in a linear sandbox, where I can set up a home base and continue playing forever, collecting things as I want to.
Yeah, I mean, you got to remember with Bethesda, I mean, all they do, the Game Studios branch, all they do is make RPGs. They've been doing this since, I think, over 20 years now. And
Yeah.
all they've made pretty much is RPGs. I mean, they made a couple one-off sports games, but no one really gave a shit about those. So, I mean, they are professionals at making RPGs. They know what the fuck they're doing.
Yeah, Bethesda Game Studios, that's literally all they do. They are Bethesda has this weird thing where they are world builders. That's exactly what they do, and they have a very specific style that is noticeable to anyone who has ever played any of their games.
Yeah. I mean, Todd Howard, you can't give the man enough credit. I mean, that man is a visionary. I mean, he's like a what's his name, Hideo Kojima for the Metal Gear series. He just dumps his
Yes.
soul into each and every project. I mean,
Absolutely.
he immerses it, and him and his team just immerse themselves into the one project they're working on, and they just try to make it into its own, entity, its own world. They can just go in and just spend thousands of hours in for years straight and just never get bored. That's why they're so great, and no one makes games like them.
Yeah, and I think
part of the reason that no one makes games like Bethesda is that as of recent years, there really hasn't been... I mean, as far as RPGs go, you have that are really extremely popular. You have GTA and Bethesda games.
Yeah,
No,
well, I mean,
that's-
GTA is not
I
really
disagree.
an RPG.
I disagree. You also have Dragon Age and the Witcher series,
Yeah.
which are also very, very popular.
Well, I mean, she's saying there's not a whole lot of, huge AAA RPGs, which is kind of true to an extent. But I mean, I think we've been seeing a resurgence in, recent years with that. Starting with, Skyrim. Everybody saw how big Skyrim was and how much it sold, and everybody's like, oh, people still actually want to play these RPG single-player games, and that's why you see, people like, continuing to make Dragon Age and, Shadow of Mordor and the Witcher series. So, I mean, yeah.
And I want to clarify something here. We're not talking about all RPG games because there has been quite a few RPG games that have come out. We still have the Assassin's Creed series and things like that. I'm trying to. There was another series that was just popping in my head that I just came out, but I think that we're talking about open world sandbox, create your own character RPGs. I think that what we're talking about there is what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, Assassin's Creed is okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's pretty much Bethesda's domain. I mean, the only other series I can really think of that's like that is maybe Mass Effect, but not even.
The first thing that popped in my head when he was saying you can explore as you want and create your own character and have your own home base and like hoard things, it instantly popped into my mind was Diablo.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, Diablo 3 popped in my head immediately. And I don't know about you, John, but I spent quite a few hours in Diablo 3. I know a lot of people complain about the simplified yada yada yada, but I didn't care. I enjoyed it, and I think that that's probably the best comparison that you can make. It's got that similar open world feeling. You can hoard things. You can upgrade your character and skills and levels and all that sort of thing. So it's really just that Bethesda's style is very unique. But I don't think it's fair to say that no one makes games like Bethesda because, again, we we have been doing this for 15 weeks. We obviously love Bethesda, but I don't think it's fair to say that other companies don't create games that are very, very good within the customizable RPG sort of style.
Yeah, I mean, other companies definitely, make RPGs like this, but I mean, Bethesda is, I mean, it comes down to personal opinion, but in my opinion, they're the best at it. I mean, and Skyrim sales and Fallout 3 sales and New Vegas' sales can all attest to it.
I think that, in my opinion, Bethesda is the best at world building. I think that that's their strong suit. I'm never gonna say that Bethesda is the best at mechanics. I'm never gonna say that Bethesda is the best at writing a really good story. They are very, very good at building a world.
Yeah, definitely.
And every facet of Skyrim and Morrowind, Oblivion, all those, they all had very, very just flourishing lives. Every single NPC had their own daily routine and things like that. So it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and even just the little things that go into, Fallout and such, like reading, lore books in Skyrim, or reading journal entries on computers in Fallout. I mean, there's just so much little details in the games that make them so good.
They put so much backstory into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, as far as lore goes, I mean, the two of the richest series in video games are, The Elder Scrolls and Fallout. There's just so much, backstory and, characters to, talk about. I mean, let's talk about them for weeks.
I think that if you want to really get nitpicky, I would say that probably the Elder Scrolls series has the deepest lore of any game that I can think of. Any game series ever. I mean, even more than Fallout. Fallout's focus is mainly on one country, but I think that the Elder Scrolls kind of beats them out in the fact that they have multiple countries across many, many centuries, and it's a completely fantasy world with nothing based in reality. And I think that the fact that they managed to create that and create such a rich world from it, even though the foundations were set up by a different company, the fact that they've managed to continue it and even expand it is quite incredible.
Yeah, I mean, all the credit in the world has to go to, the great minds from old Black Owl Studios, Chris Avallone and Brian Fargo and such for, coming up with, Fallout and all the backstory to it.
Yeah.
But, and I mean, with the Elder Scrolls, I mean, it's like the same thing. I mean, they talked about, like Dragonborns and such, and like, Oblivion a lot, and, and Morrowind and such. And then, they revisited in Skyrim as, you play as the Dragonborn. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that it's so rich that you can, they could like go back in time and fuck, what am I saying?
They can touch on things that were talked about even in just one conversation and
that's
write it out into a full story.
Yeah.
Somebody said,
right now.
Yeah, it's one of those things where somebody says a one-off comment and all of a sudden, a few years later, you're seeing an entire game made about that.
Yeah.
And it's just incredible. And we'll see, like, within the games, in Morrowind and some of the older games in the Elder Scrolls series, we saw them talking about Hist Sab, and then we got to see a Hist tree in Skyrim, or was it Skyrim or was it Oblivion? It was Oblivion, where you got to see the Hist tree for the first time, and it's one of those things where all these things just sort of come together and make just this rich world, and every single time that there's even the smallest thing, it can be expanded upon. And I felt like I just repeated myself because
but enough talking about Elder Scrolls. Let's talk about Fallout.
Yeah, going back to Fallout. But again, I think that the best example of that is probably the Followers of the Apocalypse. We saw them once in Fallout 1. We thought they were destroyed because we didn't see them in Fallout 2 or Fallout 3. And then all of a sudden, New Vegas, they've popped right back up.
Yep.
It's one of those things where it's a one-off thing, and then it comes back as a big main player.
Yeah, definitely.
But anyways, I think that's enough of that. Hopefully we answered all of your questions, and if we didn't get to your question this week, hopefully we'll get to it next. If not, well, try and submit it again. So we're going to move on to today's main topic, which is going to be food, which is why we our charity for today was famine and food and getting people what they need. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about in the Wasteland. Now, Monty, your immediate comment when I said today's topic was going to be food, you thought that there wasn't going to be enough to talk about today. And why was that?
I don't know. I'm an ignorant asshole, I guess.
I'm not trying...
I don't know.
You're not wrong, but that's not where we're going.
Prove me wrong. Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of this background with food in the Fallout lore that we just don't really pay attention to. For example, why does all the food from before the war still exist? how has in 200 years this food hasn't spoiled, hasn't completely blown away to dust?
Well, I think part of it, like not spoiling, is because of all the radiation and stuff they use in the food, if I'm not wrong, in the Fallout timeline. It's something to do with that, I read.
What were you gonna say, John?
I was actually just thinking about this when you mentioned the topic was food. Because like now in our world, we have like the food that we can send up to space that is like vacuum sealed and will never spoil.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like you pretty much need to like add water to it, and you have mashed potatoes or you have ice cream or whatever. And I feel like in the Fallout universe they would have something similar to that, to just because they were so technologically advanced that I feel like they would have some way to make food never spoil.
Mm. So you think that just all the food, just in general, was just made to never spoil?
Right.
That's interesting, and my immediate thought with that was that, and it's something that we can point out within the Fallout lore in general, is that people don't really seem to get sick very often. They get wounded, but very rarely do they get a cold or the flu. Other than, I mean, we could mention the new plague. That's something that we could talk about. And a lot of that comes down to, what viruses and bacteria are around. You get a cut on your leg out in the wasteland, you would expect that everybody's going to get an infection if they get a cut. There's no real way for out in the outlands, maybe in New Vegas or in the big cities in the NCR, you're going to have access to clean water and some sanitation. But out in the waste, you're going to get an infection. But we don't see that a lot.
Not entirely true. There are ways to
stop
an infection. Yeah.
But in general.
But I mean, if you're a survivor in a nuclear wasteland, you have to be like immune to some of this stuff by now.
Yeah,
I
agree.
Or
I agree. But go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Jordan.
Nope, you first.
Or like when the nuclear war happened, the radiation and the fallout from it, eradicated the viruses or the bacteria.
It could have had a cleansing effect, yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to bring up, is maybe there is just so little bacteria in the world now that it just doesn't eat away at things like it does in our world. I mean, in our world, you leave a banana in the street and it's going to rot, not only from, the effects of rain and sunshine, but also because bacteria are going to be constantly feeding on it. But in this world, I mean, we've seen skeletons from before the war out in the open still completely intact. We've seen bodies in caves where bacteria, there's obviously some open air that have been there for 50 plus years that haven't decayed almost whatsoever, Yeah. So I think that it definitely comes down to exactly what you said. It's a cleansing effect. So I'm wondering if that's exactly what's happening to the food, is that there's just no bacteria left around to make this food decay.
I mean, it could be. I mean, humans, make a lot of, mess and germs and stuff just by, occupying space. And with no humans around to do anything, I mean, like, those foods could just have been, like, frozen in time pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think that that's definitely part of it. But
I think another part of it is just, probably like our world. The Fallout universe uses a lot of preservatives.
That could be, and they could absolutely, like John said, there could be a lot more preservatives in it than what we think. It could just be completely designed to last for forever. But the thing that I was going to bring up is, how does this change how storage works for farmers, for ranchers, for things like that? Because we've seen in New Vegas, we saw the sharecropper farms, which had a problem with getting water, which is, that's something that you're going to be concerned with when you're growing crops. You don't have enough water. But we didn't see any problem with storage in any of these areas. We never heard about food getting spoiled.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's necessarily the problem. I think the main problem is that a lot of the wastelanders have forgotten the secrets to making food in large quantities and growing food in large quantities. That's why we see I can't remember the doctor's name in New Vegas at Camp McCarran. Hildern. Yeah, he asked you to go on a quest to Vault 22 to retrieve the gek or whatever, find out what's making the plants grow.
It wasn't a gek. It was
what was it?
It was like a growth serum.
Yeah, the growth serum or whatever. Because they don't have any clue how to make food like that anymore. It was just lost in the Great War.
But I think I disagree with you, because we've seen farms We saw farms back in Shady Sands in Fallout 1 that were working pretty well. They didn't know this. They didn't know some things like crop rotation, but the main principles were there.
Yeah,
They
but they can't produce it on a massive scale like, the United States did before the war. I mean, Hildern tells you that if the NCR doesn't figure something out, within 10 to 20 years, they're going to run out of food, and there's going to be a huge food shortage, and it'll be a huge crisis.
But on the opposite side of that, we also see people like, what's that quest in the Ultralux where you have to save his son?
Yeah,
What's the
Beyond
name
the
of that
Beast.
guy?
Heck Anderson.
Big
Anderson.
corner farmer.
Yeah, a bighorner rancher. He's like big time, owns, he's rich enough that it was easy for him to travel to New Vegas, and rich enough and powerful enough to tell the Ultralux, no, I'm going to have my bodyguards and guns on me when I come into your establishment.
Yeah, I mean, he could be so rich because, there's not many of them left. I mean, if you walk around New Vegas, I mean, from what's in the game, you don't see many, bighorner farms and such. The only ones you see are pretty much destroyed. The only farm you really see in New Vegas is the sharecropper farm.
But there's also mention of other things, like when you go on the quest for the NCR to go and get a meat supplier. The stop and slop.
Yeah, stop and slop.
Is that what it's called? It's
I think so.
Yeah, it's got the guy that sells nothing but meat and the girl that sells nothing but water. Out past the Aerotech offices.
And I think that's what it's called.
Grab and gulp. There you go. And the meat guy there, the second that you say, hey, the NCR needs X amount of meat, he's like, yeah, sure, I'll set it up. So how do you explain that?
I mean, part of that might be mechanics, but just the fact that it's a game.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's not hard to be a farmer.
Yeah.
I mean...
But we still see that the land is irradiated. I mean, Monty does have a point.
It would be easier to... The NCR is in a better position to be farming than those in the Capital Wasteland.
I would definitely agree. That would also be because out in California and out in the Mojave, the NCR has been cleaning up radiation and cleaning up areas for a while now.
Right. Well, even that aside, the problem with farming in the capital is that it's not broken down enough.
That's
it's still an industrial area, not industrial, but like an urban area.
Yeah.
With the Mojave, at least you have space.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. The other thing that I think that the waste that in California, at least, and especially in the Mojave, is they probably have access to more water, fresh water, than they do in the Capital Wasteland. In the Mojave, they have Lake Mead, and
right.
I'm sure that they could find a way to funnel off some of the water from Hoover Dam, and the Colorado's right there as well. So Mojave is pretty much set up on water as long as they can get the proper channels to actually make use of it. So I think that that's another huge part of it. But the thing that I just realized as I'm thinking about this more and more is, they have set up the OSI, the Offices of Science and Industry, the NCR has, specifically because they need to figure out ways to grow more food and things like that. I think that what they're missing out on is they're in the Mojave where, we've already seen that they're starting to adopt plants and animals that have mutated from before the war. We see the bighorners and Brahmin are being raised and things like that. But we don't ever see them using mutated plants. It's all the same plants. It's corn. It's what is it? Help me out here. Some of the other plants they were growing. Yeah.
And whatever, the banana
yucca, bell cactus fruit.
Yeah, and I think that they need to start using some more of those native plants that have mutated to allow them to grow in those areas. And I'm really curious as to why they haven't.
Yeah, that's a good question.
And I think the only time that we really do see that is in Point Lookout in the Capital Wasteland. We see them growing the punga fruits.
Right, and they're in the works. Well, they already have it figured out on how to use selective breeding.
Mm-hmm. To get the refined punga and things like that. And I think that that's exactly where the NCR needs to go in order to build on that.
Yeah. I mean, also, like a lot of the technology that the NCR and like the Brotherhood have been able to scavenge from before the war. I mean, a lot of that was focused on military technology and urbanization and such like that. I mean, like pre-war, United States wasn't really focused on making food and providing for its citizens because that was the one thing that they were pretty well off with. So there weren't really many advances in like agriculture and such.
Mm-hmm. That's very true. And I think even today we're seeing in real life U.S. we see that there's more and more a decrease of farmers every year. And while these farmers still do grow very, very large amounts of food, it's not nearly as much as we used to.
Yeah.
Well, like, and I come from a farming background. My parents they're big in that urban farming stuff, and so they have a greenhouse in their backyard. It's hella tight. But it's not like when I go to their friends who are also in the farming industry, it's something that people are trying to get out of because they can't keep up. The demand for it isn't, you're not going to make enough, is basically the thing. Like no matter how much you grow, there's always going to be more,
Yeah.
and it's mostly done by large farming companies.
Yeah.
Yeah, not only that, but in today's world we have a lot of stuff that's imported. I mean, there's no way you're
Right.
gonna get bananas in the winter.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
In
that's the way that our world is going towards. It's less single family-owned farms and more of these big corporations that own multiple farms. And I don't know, like I don't think it's really ever talked about in the Fallout lore if there's any big agriculture corporations or anything like that. But I'm sure that's the way that Fallout headed too.
Well, based on the fact that Heck Gunderson says that he's quite rich, I would imagine that he actually owns a conglomerate of more than one ranch, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah,
He
I was talking.
probably has at least three or four
Hmm.
and has a sharecropping kind of thing going on.
Yeah. John, what's your take on this?
I don't know. I feel like because most of the food that you find in the Fallout universe is like, I mean, you find Instamash and you find like crayon and all
Fancy
that.
lad snacks, cakes.
Sugar bombs. I feel like at the time of the Great War, almost everything was like, corporated. Like
Hmm.
they didn't have like families of farmers who farmed their own stuff and sold it. I feel like everything got corporated at one point in time.
Yeah, well, Fallout the Fallout world before the war is pretty much run by big business, and that's what constituted like the Enclave before the war. Is just like an enclave of all the big business leaders and such.
Yeah.
And
Like,
I feel like nowadays, like in New Vegas, with the sharecroppers, they're having a hard time trying to actually farm because it was so outdated by people who weren't part of that corporation.
Mm.
Right.
Interesting. It's definitely an interesting thought process of trying to go through the timeline to see where mistakes were made. And I think that you're definitely hitting the nail on the head there. That probably very few people did know about these kinds of things.
And it definitely makes sense for everything to be corporatized because pretty much all, like, the pre-war Fallout universe was very Americana, a
Yeah,
capitalist
very
wet
capitalist.
dream.
Yeah, the whole anti-communist sentiment was at an all-time high. So I definitely think that that's definitely a big part of it. But here's the question: Monty mentioned Dr. Hildren mentioning that they don't have enough food. Are we going to see the NCR in the future going downhill because they can't make enough food?
I
I
feel like
mean,
that's plausible.
yeah, because I mean they keep trying to acquire new lands, and they're just gonna stretch themselves too thin eventually.
Yeah, and I
Right.
think that would also be a really interesting part of lore is that it's becoming where California is it's basically no longer a wasteland. It's no longer quote unquote Fallout because it's becoming a country again. And I think that would be a really interesting thing to see in the lore where NCR falls apart, and all of a sudden you can bring your games back to California because it's the wasteland again.
Yeah, I mean they could almost be setting that up. I mean with New Vegas,
Hmm.
like the NCR acquiring the Mojave. I mean that could also be a bad thing. Now they got more people to feed and more land to control, and they could keep going eastward and trying to fight Caesar's Legion and spending a ton of resources there, while back home at the hub things would be falling apart.
Yeah, absolutely. And it would be very, very interesting to see if that's actually what they're going to do. And I'm still curious to see where other countries are going to pop up, or quote unquote countries, because we've seen mention of the Great Khans and the followers sort of making their own thing up in Wyoming in one of the endings of New Vegas. Caesar's Legion has their own territory. I wouldn't quite call it a country. What do you guys think?
It just really depends on which ending they choose to be the canon one, I guess.
Yeah,
Well, I mean Caesar's Legion is more just a bunch of tribes that were assimilated together.
yeah. But Caesar, while Caesar is alive, I think they're tightly controlled enough to be called a pseudo country.
Yeah.
But we really haven't heard about any of these other big players coming out anywhere else in the U.S. We don't see, the Brotherhood of Steel running country in the Capital Wasteland. We don't, we see things like the Pit, but that's one settlement.
Yeah, I mean, as far as we've seen, most people haven't been able to move past, one settlement, controlling one settlement, besides like the NCR. I mean, we see in the Capital Wasteland, you got the Lions Brotherhood. I mean, that's just, one area, just the capital area. We haven't really seen any other nations besides the NCR and I guess Caesar's Legion that have been able to control, a sizable amount of land.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because they just don't have like the equipment mostly. I mean, they don't have vehicles. They don't have the stuff to grow food for a long time.
But we're approaching a time in the timeline where they would start to redevelop that kind of stuff. They are going to start. They have the caravans going. That's the foundations of civilization.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, also, I mean, I backtrack. I mean, not the Enclave has a lot of that technology, but also they're just super corrupt and evil and just want to kill everybody in the wasteland. So
yeah, they're not going to be really keen on sharing.
Yeah.
Well, they might be keen on sharing as long as everybody else is obedient to them.
Or human.
And they're human, yes. That's a very good point. And I think that a lot of that... Here's my question. Can we count the fact that they haven't moved past this sort of wasteland stage is it due to the storytelling, because, we have to keep the wasteland as a wasteland, or is it because of something within the lore? Is there something that is stopping them from developing these kinds of things? Because you would think that developments in the NCR, the redevelopment of irrigation, developments of new medicines, and we've seen things like jet spread across the wasteland quite quickly. Why haven't all of these sort of innovations spread quite quickly? We've seen in human history and anthropology that farming spread fairly quickly, and that allowed the development of permanent settlements. But what is it? So is it storytelling that's preventing the wasteland from becoming developed again, or is there something physically stopping them within the lore?
Well, I just think it's gonna have to start happening soon. I mean, you got all these, factions with their technology. I mean, you even got the Institute on the East Coast, which is, super advanced technology. So, I mean, eventually, I mean, you can't keep this technology locked up and isolated in one place forever. I mean, you even got, Big Mountain. I mean, eventually people are going to find these places, and eventually they're going to take their technology elsewhere, and then eventually we'll see, more, nations arise.
Yeah. And, I think that it's been 200 years since the Great War as of Fallout 3. When are they going to have to start going back in the timeline and having games take place before then?
Yeah, but I mean, also you got to remember, I mean, the Great War pretty much, set humanity back, hundreds of years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of unreasonable to, expect, the United States to just, rise again after, 200 years. I mean, it's going to be a long fucking time before there's another, country as big as, like, the United States was, or even, any other country before the war.
I definitely wouldn't expect them to be the size that the U.S. is or was before the Great War, but I would expect maybe something closer to,
Well, because, I mean, here's a good example. I mean, right now, people in the wasteland, at this point in the timeline, are still focused about, just surviving. I mean, you got all these mutated creatures running around, Deathclaws and such. I mean, they're focused about surviving. I mean, once they can be safe, once they can feel safe and knowing that, they're not going to be attacked by all these creatures and, the Enclave isn't going to kill them and the super mutants, then they can move on to, okay, how do we, start living? How do we start improving the quality of life and, start building, cities and countries again? But they're just not at that point
you could use that same argument with the American expansion into the West in real life.
Yeah, that's true. And I think that one of the things that we're not really paying attention to is the fact that a lot of the expansion of civilization also happens to coincide with the expansion of communication. And in Fallout, we see that there's already communication. We've seen working computers, which are available to store information. Libraries are still around with readable, legible books. The radio is still around. And those are things that are absolutely necessary in order to have large developed territories is that you have to have the ability to communicate from, the most northern point to the most southern point in a relatively quick manner. In ancient times they would have used couriers and things like that, but I feel like the expansion from surviving to thriving or to a territorial state would have gone a lot quicker.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, it's been 200 years since the Great War, and like you can use the finding of America as like a basis point. The fact that from 1607 to 1807, there was a lot of expansion, there was a lot of technological advances for that time, and
Yeah.
in Fallout, it's been 200 years, and I understand that it's a wasteland. But I mean, you even have leftover technology from before the war.
Mm-hmm.
So why hasn't expansion or a grand civilization happened quicker than that?
It really doesn't make sense, and it makes you wonder if there's, again, I'm going to guess that it has something to do with the storytelling, that we have to keep the wasteland a wasteland because that's what the game is. Fallout is
Right.
a wasteland game, but it makes you wonder where in the lore is the tipping point. What is the wall that's stopping them from getting ahead? Is it that people are less intelligent? Is it because radiation is it because of the development of farming and things like that just haven't picked up enough speed because of these hurdles like radiation of the ground and developing good irrigation systems because lack of water aren't allowing for large food sources, because that's a huge part of a civilization is definitely food and water sources. What is happening? What's going on that's stopping them?
I think the fact that you said that people may not be as smart as they used to is very true, because I mean there's no education system. So how can people learn the stuff like science and stuff to,
That's
go
not
on and
true.
improve?
There is an education system, but it's not widespread.
Well, I mean there's like, classrooms here and there that you see, but there's no like,
It's not standardized and it's not
yeah.
widespread.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure if the NCR has a standardized education system yet. I don't think they do. I've never read anything about that, but
I haven't either, actually, now that I
yeah.
think.
And I mean, if they don't, then what are they doing? I mean, that's one of the first things that you would need as a civilization. Make sure your children are educated enough so they can, keep building on what you started.
I'm not a historian, but you have to wonder at what time period in history did a mandatory outside of the home education become the norm?
And I feel like that's what the followers are trying to do. They're trying to go around and teach. I mean, Caesar, before he was Caesar, was a follower, and he was sent out to teach and to learn. So I mean, I feel like the followers are doing a very, very good job at trying to teach other people in the wasteland about everything, really.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think about, and we've also seen that the Brotherhood of Steel is trying to accumulate knowledge, and that they do have classrooms within the Brotherhood of Steel. In New Vegas, we saw in the bunker that they had a whole classroom set up. In Fallout 3, we saw that the Alexandria Library, what was that? Arlington Library was being used quite heavily, and that they were trying to clear out raiders so that way they could get access to everything.
Yeah,
So
I mean, they have the task of trying to rediscover a lot of this knowledge that was lost because of the war.
yeah.
Well,
Go ahead. Nope, you first.
Well, free public education in the U.S. at least became a thing in 1918, and was mostly because of child labor laws.
Hmm. Well, you have to give children something to do during the day while the parents work.
Yeah, well, it's mostly
Right.
because companies needed more skilled laborers. I mean,
Uh-huh.
in the Fallout world, I mean, they don't really like the NCR doesn't really need super skilled laborers because they don't produce much. I mean, like most of their stuff they use is still pre-war stuff. I don't know how much they actually produce. Like they don't make cars or televisions or radios or anything like that.
Right.
So I
and
mean,
if you
so I
have a
mean, in
dumb
a sense, they
army,
don't even
then
need education. Yeah, they just need people to grab ammo and shoot.
But they have to. Here's my thing: is I think that the NCR does produce their own guns.
they have to at least be able to repair them.
Yes, but here's my argument for the fact that they are probably making guns is the fact that we see guns that are not only look new. The what is it? The assault rifle, I think is the name. The one that you get as a reward for killing the ants outside of the Mojave outpost.
Oh, yeah. Assault carbine?
The service rifle.
Yeah, the service rifle. Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. And it would seem like that would be standard pre-war military, but at the exact same time, there are so many that unless they had access to many, many warehouses full of these weapons, I think they would have to be producing them. We've seen in the pit that they have the ability to produce ammunition. So would it be so far-fetched to think that the NCR has the ability to create weapons in some sort of factory that they had built up? Because that would be skilled labor.
Pit, we see them making weapons.
Well, auto axes. I don't think that they were making any actual guns, but they were definitely making ammunition and auto axes.
Right.
So it just comes down to, are we going to see in the future that they do need skilled labor for something besides, a lot of scientists and things like that? And you're right that it is a lot of people that just need to grab ammunition and shoot, but at the exact same time, you have to have people who are able to communicate effectively over radio. They have to know how to build these radio towers. And obviously they have some people because they built a few of they built the ranger stations all across the Mojave.
And God, they probably have to, they have to have a medic of some form.
Mm-hmm.
They have to have at least a small educated population.
In fact, I would actually argue large, and I think that it's larger than we think because we also have to remember that they repaired the Hoover Dam.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. That's a lot of just scientists and doctors and such. I mean, I'm saying as far as skilled laborers, I mean they don't have. Well, I mean they could have factories, I guess, but as far as we know, they don't really have factories.
I think that it's a really interesting question to sort of ponder.
Yeah.
But I think that is about all the time that we have today. But before we go, we're going to start something new today. Monty, you want to tell them about it?
Yeah, so we're going to have you, the fans, decide what we should talk about for our next episode. So just get in the comment section or find us on Twitter at Holotapes Weekly and just give us a suggestion of what you want us to talk about in the next episode.
Yep, could be anything at all, from anything big to anything small. Even if you just want to, pose us a question and we find that it's good, and we'll just sort of pick which one we think is going to be best and the most interesting. And I do want to say that if you feel like we haven't covered something enough, but we have talked about it in a previous podcast, don't be afraid to bring it back up. We can always have another episode, about whatever we've talked about in the past.
Just not Fallout 4.
Not Fallout 4. Can't have that.
Yeah, gotta save that for the 4s.
Yep. And once we hit the 40s, Fallout 4 will be out, so we'll actually have something to talk about.
Yeah.
And hopefully by that time, we'll be making some walkthroughs and some achievement guides.
Less than 100 days until E3, by the way.
Less than 100 days till E3, and hopefully we'll get an announcement then. But anyways, I want to thank Jordan, Monty, and Mr. John for joining me today, and it has definitely been a pleasure to have you on. And for all our lovely listeners, I hope you have a wonderful day. See you again soon. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.